Hello, hello, hello. Happy Friday. If you're new to the group, my name is Haley and I am the founder of the group here, Perimenopause Body Solutions. And you'll have to excuse me, I have a little bit of a croaky voice today. I'm not sure why. I feel completely fine, but my voice is a little bit croaky, so there we have it. It's hard to say why. But today we are talking about keto, and we are talking about my version of keto, which I call clean and green keto. And I haven't actually done a training on keto in quite a long time inside this group. And for those of you that have been following me for a while, you probably know that while I love keto and I think that it's a great approach for not just weight loss, but also just generally for our health, I also find it a little bit restrictive and hard to follow. So generally speaking, I consider myself to be keto-ish, which is my version of a more flexible approach to keto. But that being said, committing to keto is kind of key at the beginning to just help your body switch over to using fat for fuel, which we're going to get into. And so I wanted to do a training for women out there that are maybe just new to keto or low carb in general, and just give you like a little bit of a like just the basics of like what keto is, because I think it is very misunderstood. So we're going to talk about what it is. I'm also going to talk about how you can prepare your body for ketosis to make that switch from burning sugar to burning fat as a main fuel source. And then we're going to dive into keto flu, which is, it's kind of part of the process, but there are definitely ways to make that switch a little bit more pleasant. And then finally, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to go into too much detail. What I am going to do is really just teach you like this very simple system that I created for my clients about 2 years ago to just help women understand what to eat, like what foods to prioritize and what foods to avoid, so that they can get into ketosis and stay in ketosis without having to track macros, because that's probably the one element of ketogenic diets that I hate the most, because I am not a calorie counter, I am not a food tracker, I don't have the patience for it. And so I had to come up with a system for myself to figure out how to get into ketosis and stay in ketosis, because I just had no patience for MyFitnessPal or Carb Manager or any of the apps out there that require all of that work. So stay tuned. We're going to dive into all of that. Again, apologies for my croaky voice today. I feel really good. I don't know what's going on, but that's what it is. And as per usual, I would love to know where you are joining me from. So if you're watching me live right now, just put a live in the comments. I've got my phone here so that I can see you guys. And if you have any questions as I go through this, just ask me, and I'm watching right here. So say live in the comments, or if you're catching the replay, put a replay in the comments. I would also like to know, just so that I have a little bit of an idea of who I'm talking to. So I want to know if you are A, like brand new to keto, never done it, never started, B, kind of dabbling in keto, or C, you're already doing it, but you're hoping to learn a little bit more. So if you can let me know in the comments just where you're at in this whole keto journey, that would be really, really helpful. And again, as questions come up, look, see, I'm watching myself go live as I go live so that I can see what your questions are, because I can't really see them inside the Facebook app. So let's dive in. So I want to start by talking about what keto is. So keto is short for ketogenic. And typically speaking, I'm not going to go into much science here. I'm going to just explain it the way that I would explain it to like my friend or my mom. But basically what it is like what you're doing is you're restricting carbohydrates to a certain degree in order to force your body to have to use a different fuel source. And you can kind of think of, there's different ways that you can get into ketosis. So if you, this is where I like to explain to my clients, like, this is like, because some people think that it's not normal and that we absolutely need carbohydrates to survive. This is definitely a myth that is out in the, internet. You have to understand that if that was true, none of us would be here. None of us would be here. Your body has the ability to use fat for fuel. It does not need to rely on carbohydrates. It has that ability because we wouldn't be here if it did not. Think of like your cave woman ancestors, right? They had to go through periods of feast and famine, and when they went through their periods of famine, for whatever reason, they were in ketosis. And all that simply means is that their body makes this metabolic switch. And what it starts to do when there's no carbohydrates coming in to fuel the body and give the body energy, it makes this metabolic switch. And it starts to take the fat from your fat cells and it metabolizes that fat and it breaks it down. And one of the things that it breaks it down into are ketones. And ketones become the main fuel source. That's what ketosis is. You are in ketosis when you are producing ketones. Now, cave woman had to basically starve herself in order for this metabolic switch to happen. But nutritional ketosis is when you mimic starvation. You still eat a ton of food, but you mimic starvation. So your body's like, okay. And I know that sounds bad, but it's actually not bad. What happens though is that you're still giving the body plenty of calories from protein, from fat, but you're deliberately reducing the amount of calories coming in from carbohydrates so that the body has to go after the fat and turn it into ketones. And essentially that's what ketosis and ketogenic diets are all about, making this metabolic switch. And I've talked about this a few times where what happens is that generally speaking, the standard American diet or the standard Canadian diet has like a ton of carbohydrates, and the body it will always choose carbohydrates when given the choice because it's a lot easier to metabolize carbohydrates. It's way less work for the body. So if you give your body carbohydrates all the time, it will use those carbohydrates, which means it has no need to go and use your stored body fat. So that's why keto works, because you're now forcing the body essentially to access these body fat stores. The other thing that you should understand about keto, which is kind of cool, is that when it comes to like typical like diets, right? Like we cut our calories because you do need a caloric deficit in order to lose weight, just not too much. But typically speaking, when we create that caloric deficit, the body is now in this position where there's more calories going out than calories coming in. And over time, the body compensates. And it compensates by making you hungrier, by increasing cravings, by increasing appetite. None of that happens on keto because your body has the metabolic flexibility to access that body fat. And we do not have a shortage of body fat, which is kind of one of the cool things about keto. And that is probably that's probably what intrigued me the most about keto, where I had this aha moment where I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. You're not hungry, you're not cranky, you're not moody because you're on a diet, because your body is just using energy from elsewhere. And for a lot of women, we don't have that metabolic flexibility. So that's sort of like just to give you like a basic understanding of what keto is, why it works. Now, it's very, like I said, it's a diet that I feel is a little bit misrepresented in the media because a lot of people judge keto saying that it's all about like butter and bacon and cream and cheese and steaks. And if there's one thing that I hope that you get out of today's chat of my version of keto, and not just mine, but a lot of people, is that keto does not have to be about that. Keto does not mean that you have to give up vegetables and that you have to give up carbs completely. I want to show you that, in fact, you can eat a ton of carbs if you are eating the right carbs. And then it can be a very, very, very healthy way of eating. I think another misconception when it comes to keto is that people think that, oh my God, you're going to be eating all of this fat, you're going to die of a heart attack. So the other thing that I want to very quickly, and I'm not going to dive into this in detail because it would be just, it's a whole like other can of worms, but what I want you to understand is that when people start a ketogenic diet, not all people, but most people, when they start a ketogenic diet, they actually see an improvement in their health. I am a person who is all about health first when it comes to weight loss. Like, don't go on some extreme diet to lose weight at the cost of your own health. I want your health to be your number one priority, and I truly believe that a ketogenic approach, when done the right way, can have a very positive impact on your health. When I started keto, I did blood tests, all different kinds of blood tests. I'm going to tell you exactly which ones, with my naturopathic doctor to see how my body was responding. And he was like, these are some of the best blood tests I've ever seen. Like, he was totally on board. He's like, keep doing what you're doing. So if you are afraid of fat, if you are afraid of keto because you're like, oh my God, it's going to clog my arteries and give me a heart attack, then keep watching. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do today is I want to talk a little bit. I'm just checking here to make sure there's no questions. And I can see there is Joanne, Tammy, Chantel, Ashley is here, and Grammy M. I love that nickname, Grammy M. And so hello, ladies, and let's dive in. So the first thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about just how to prepare your body for moving into ketosis, because it is a very big switch, especially if you're coming at it from the standard American diet or from the standard Canadian diet that is high in carbs. So what I want to talk about is sort of like these four steps that I recommend for women that they can do in order to shift into ketosis. And the first thing, which I kind of talked about, is get a baseline. So get a baseline of like where you're at now, which is what I was just talking about, so that you can figure out if keto works for you. Because there is no one size fits all diet. Even though I love keto, I'm still not going to tell you that keto is the perfect diet for everyone. And so the first thing you need to do before you even start is get a baseline. Get some blood tests done now, so that in 3 months from now, you can get more done and you can literally see how your body is changing for the good, hopefully, or for the bad. There are some people that don't do well with keto, but getting that baseline and then doing it again in 3 months to see how your body is reacting is really one of the best things that you can do, especially if you are afraid of eating fat. So there are a ton of different tests that you can do, but the four that I would recommend, the first one would be something called high sensitivity C-reactive protein. And this is a test that measures inflammation in the body. And a ketogenic diet is often referred to as an anti-inflammatory diet if done the right way, once again. And so this is a marker that can be very interesting, especially for women going through perimenopause and menopause, because we are naturally going to have more inflammation as we age. So if we can find a way to reduce it, like, hey, yeah, amen, I'm all in. So that would be one. The next one that I would just do a standard lipid profile measuring cholesterol and triglycerides. And cholesterol is another kind of hot topic. I think there's a very big misinterpretation or misunderstanding of cholesterol and the importance of cholesterol. But basically, what you want to be looking at and what you want your doctor to be looking at is the ratio of cholesterol to triglyceride. And what typically happens for women and men when they go on a ketogenic diet is that triglycerides go down, HDL, which is like the happy cholesterol, goes up, and LDL also sometimes goes up, but there are two types of LDL. There's like a small particle and a large particle. The small ones are the dangerous ones. they usually go down and the big ones go up, okay? Typically speaking, not standard, can't guarantee it. This is why you got to do the tests. The next one that I would do is a hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin A1C is going to test insulin resistance, which is another big marker of perimenopause and menopause. If you've heard me before, as estrogen goes down, insulin resistance goes up. So again, you can think of this as a dietary strategy to work with your changing hormones and your changing physiology. And typically speaking, on a ketogenic diet, insulin resistance is going to go down. And then the fourth one that I would do is a thyroid panel, because we are a little bit more sensitive to a lower carb approach than men. And so it's really important to make sure that if you are going to go on a ketogenic approach, and again, as you know, I'm not about strict keto, and we're going to be talking more about that, but you got to make sure that your thyroid is on check. You don't want a ketogenic diet to have a negative effect on your thyroid. So this is going to be really important for my ladies out there who already have been diagnosed with hypothyroidism, which once again is pretty typical during perimenopause and menopause. And this is one of the ways, or one of the reasons, that we as women over the age of 35 have to do keto just slightly differently. Okay? So that's the first step. The second step that I want you to do, still in preparation for ketosis, is just to slowly start to reduce your intake of carbohydrates. There's two ways to get into ketosis. You can rip off the Band-Aid, right, and just kind of deal with keto flu, which I'm about to talk about, or you can slowly reduce your intake. You don't have to do it over a super long period of time. It could be 1 or 2 weeks, but just instead of going from eating like 200 carbs a day to 20 carbs a day, just kind of go like, just be a little bit more gentle in your approach. And typically speaking, that is going to make that whole keto flu process a little bit easier. And so I'm going to give you guys, I've got a PDF for this. So if you want this PDF, just make sure that you put cheat sheets in the comments, and I'll send you all of this. But basically it just means like getting rid of starting to tone back on like bread and pasta and rice and cereals and processed foods, and starting to avoid sugar, and trying to just eat more of like a paleo approach, like vegetables, sweet potatoes, fruit instead of chocolate and cookies and donuts or whatever it may be. But just like think of it as like 1 or 2 weeks of low to moderate carb as you move into a ketogenic approach. The third thing that you want to do is you want to increase your intake of fat slowly. And this is really a key, again, for women our age, because so many of the women our age have issues with, well, there's one of two things. Either you have no gallbladder, like I cannot believe how many women have had their gallbladders taken out, or because of our generation and the fact that we grew up on like in the era of low-fat diets, a lot of us have been avoiding fat for a very long time. And your gallbladder produces bile, and bile emulsifies fat. And so if you go from eating 30 grams of fat a day to eating 150 grams of fat a day, because that's what you're going to be eating, your gallbladder is going to be like, what are you doing? And it will not be able to keep up with the production of bile necessary to emulsify those fats. And what that means for you is you're simply not going to digest the fats, and you might get either nausea or you may get like severe diarrhea. Can you please send me the list of things to check in blood work? Yes, I can, Chantel. I will get that to you. So that is a really important one. So just think, like I always think of like carbs and fat as living on a little bit of a seesaw. So as you reduce your intake of carbs, just increase your intake of fat. It doesn't have to be drastic. Start eating more avocados. Have some nuts and seeds as your like snack instead of having like cookies and crackers and donuts. You could start having like a bit more cheese. You could add more fat to when you're cooking, right? So you're just slowly increasing that level of fat intake. And then the next thing, what I would do, step 4, as you're kind of transitioning, like that final transition, maybe like 3-4 days before you fully commit to keto, is I would do what I call keto by day, paleo by night, which is pretty much my maintenance plan. That's what keto-ish looks like. So that means that And it's also a great way to just start to learn how to actually cook ketogenic foods, because eating a ketogenic diet is completely the exact opposite of what you're probably currently doing if you're following the standard American diet. Like, you're basically going to flip it completely, like 180. And so one way of doing it, and this is how I slowly introduced myself to keto, is like, you could just start by going, okay, let's just start by making all breakfasts ketogenic. So moving forward, all of my breakfasts are going to be ketogenic. And then I'm going to make keto breakfast, and then I'm going to make a keto lunch, but maybe I'll have like a regular dinner, which is kind of like, again, that keto by day and paleo by night, which is a really great maintenance plan once you get there. But it's also, again, just like a really nice way of easing that transition into ketosis. And then when you're ready, that's when we really, really start to cut back on the carbs. So let me just pull up my sheet here and just remember what I wanted to say here. Okay, so how do we get into nutritional ketosis? So again, as I was saying at the beginning, like, getting into ketosis is pretty easy. All you're doing is you are significantly reducing your intake of carbohydrates. And by significantly, what I mean is that, typically speaking, in terms of macros or macronutrients, you're getting about 5 to 10% of your total calories from carbohydrates. You're getting about 20 grams from protein, and the rest is coming from fat. But that 5 to 10% of calories from carbohydrates is going to be somewhere between 20 and 50 grams of carbohydrates per day. And that number might mean nothing to you right now. So just to put it into context, 2 pieces of toast is probably like 30. And then you add in a banana and you're probably at 50. So you have to understand where carbs are, and that's probably the most important piece of getting into ketosis and doing it successfully without having to count, is just really understanding where carbs are coming from, and we're going to talk about that. So basically, yeah, it's 30 grams is not a lot of carbs, but like I said at the beginning, what I want you to understand is that if you're eating the right carbohydrates, you're actually eating a lot of food. You can fill your plate with carbohydrates. And this is another thing that I teach women inside my course. I have a course called Keto Essentials for Busy Women. And one of the slides that I tell them is that when you look at your plate, it should mainly be carbohydrates. It's just that you're eating the right carbohydrates, okay? So just putting that out there. So let's talk about keto flu. So once you commit, one thing that I also like to say is, this is one of the times where, because I don't really love restriction, I like flexibility in my approach, but this is one of the times when I'm like, you have got to commit 100%. This is the only time where I'm like, your all or nothing mindset is like winner right now, and I want you to use it, and I want you to commit, and I want you to commit hard. Because once you start making that transition, you don't want to like be like half in, half out. Because what's going to happen is you're going to get stuck in what we call keto flu. Who knows how long. You've got to like commit enough that your body has no choice but to make that switch from burning carbohydrates to burning fat as a main fuel source. And if you half-ass it, you're going to feel like crap. So you got to really, really commit. And you've got to commit to less than 50 grams of carbs per day. And again, doesn't mean you have to count. I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. But you do have to commit. Now, when it comes to keto flu, what it is it basically, it's exactly what it sounds like. It feels like you've got the flu. You're tired, you get headaches, you're achy, you might get heart palpitations. There's various things that can happen. All women experience this completely differently. I have some women that can be over it in like 2 days. I have some women where they're just like 10 days in and they're still struggling with keto flu. So it's really hard to say how your body is going to react to it. The 2 bigger sort of reasons that it's going to last a long time is A, you just came from eating the standard American diet and it is a shock to the system. And the other big reason for me, I believe, is stress. Because Stress, as I've talked about in some previous ones. Whoops, let's make sure I'm going here. Oh yeah, there we go. As I've talked about previously, stress raises blood glucose the same way that food can. And so if you're a highly stressed woman, there's a really good chance that keto flu might be a little bit harder for you to move past, but not impossible. So that being said, there's two sort of main sources of keto flu. The first one is dehydration. And so what you need to understand is that in your body, carbs and water are kind of like one. And so I think it is, I can't remember what the numbers are. I think it's like 3 grams of water per 1 gram of carb or something like that. So when you reduce your intake of carbohydrates and when you deplete all of the carbs in your body, what happens is you have this whoosh effect and your body lets go of water. That is why women get great weight loss results when they first start keto. They're not losing a ton of fat, they're losing a ton of water weight. Putting that out there just so you know. But you have this big loss of water weight. And so what you have to do is you have to make sure that you are hydrating properly. So drinking lots of water is really, really key here. And so 2 to 3 liters of water a day, a really good pinch of salt on your meals, because salt and water in your body, your body's always calculating sodium versus water in the body. If you don't have enough sodium, your body's going to flush the water. So you've got to make sure to add more salt, especially if you're doing the clean and green keto, the way that I recommend it, because you're not getting salt from processed foods. You've got to add salt to your foods. You could also try drinking like bone broth with extra salt or bouillon, but anything that's really salty like bacon or pickles or anything salty, but water and salt. Those are the two main things. The second main cause is that, again, as I was saying, especially if you're coming from the standard American diet, the second reason you're going through keto flu is because your body is simply confused. You have just taken away its main fuel source that it has been using for maybe 30, 40, 50 years, and you're taking it away. And although your body has the capacity to take stored body fat or dietary fat and turn it into energy, it hasn't had to do that in a very long time. And so there's this adaptation phase where your body is just going to be very confused. And so you might feel lethargic. You might be irritable. You might get hypoglycemia. You might start to really crave carbohydrates. You might get brain fog where you're just like, I can't concentrate, I can't focus. These are all very normal signs and symptoms of keto flu. The main thing that you need to do, and this is what I tell all my clients, is eat more fat. It is the best thing you can do for your body because your body is starving for energy and it's got to figure out how to get fat. It's got to, or figure out how to take fat and turn it into energy. So make sure you're eating fat. My favorite one is MCT oil when you're first getting started, medium chain triglyceride oil, because that one, it kind of bypasses the liver and gets turned like straight away into ketones, which we're trying to encourage the body to rely on ketones. So making sure that you're eating lots and lots of fat. This is not the time for caloric restriction. Do not try to go on a 1,200 calorie keto diet when you're first getting started. Eat whenever you are hungry. Don't just willpower through those cravings. Just eat fat. Anytime you want carbs, eat fat. You could even take a piece of cheese, slather some butter on it, or you could dip bacon in guacamole. I don't care what you do, but make sure you're getting lots of fat, okay? All right, so that has kind of explained how to prepare for ketosis, how to make that shift into ketosis as painless as possible. Now, what on earth does keto look like? Like, what do you eat? That is probably your next question. So what I want to kind of do is I want to just cover carbs, proteins, and fats. Like I said, I don't do macros. So I'm not going to tell you, you have to eat this amount of carbs and this is your percentage. That's not what I do. But what I have done is I've created a system for my clients where I simply give them, I teach them sort of what foods to prioritize, what foods to eat in moderation, and what foods to avoid. That's all I do. Once they know that, that's all they need. And so you can kind of think of it in terms of like sort of like a green light, an orange light, and a red light. That's the analogy I use in the course. So for carbohydrates, I have one rule, which is to make vegetables a priority. And this is a mistake I see all the time, because women have suddenly this fear that because they've got to cut their carbs, you know, if you need less than 50 grams of carbs to be in ketosis, then 20 grams is probably even better. And so suddenly they are eliminating vegetables, and now they have constipation and they feel like crap and their inflammation goes up because they're eating cheese and bacon all the time and they're wondering what's going on. So you have to make vegetables a priority. If you make vegetables a priority, you will get a ton of carbohydrates. Like your meal will be composed of mainly carbohydrates. It's just, again, coming from the right ones. The other important thing, there's two more things that are really important about vegetables. Fiber, super, super key for women our age. Super key, because especially women in perimenopause, because fiber binds to excess estrogen and pulls it out of your body. And in perimenopause, you are most likely estrogen dominant, and that is not going to make you feel good. You've got to get rid of those excess estrogens, and fiber will pull those excess estrogens out of your body. So going into a ketogenic diet without fiber, when you are estrogen dominant and you're relying on all kinds of dairy that is also a big source of estrogens, conversation for another day, but not good news. So vegetables, okay? So I just want to show you what 30 grams can look like. And this is from my course, but what I did is I wanted to show women exactly what 30 grams of carbohydrates, give or take, can look like. So in a day, that could be a half a cup of strawberries, 2 cups of spinach, half an avocado, a handful of cherry tomatoes, a handful of cucumber, a half cup of mashed cauliflower, a half a cup of asparagus, and a half a cup of green beans. That's a lot of vegetables, right? You're eating a lot of food, like density wise or volume wise, that is a lot of food. So don't be afraid of vegetables. Okay, so the way that I classify carbohydrates is, again, I have what I call green light carbs, orange light carbs, and red light carbs. Okay, it's pretty simple. Green means eat more of, orange means eat in moderation, and red means like just a little bit, avoid as much as possible. So green light carbs, the way that I classify green light carbs, they are nutrient dense, they're high in fiber, and they're very low in carbohydrates. So you can probably guess which ones they are. Dark leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables specifically, and I choose cruciferous vegetables because cruciferous vegetables are really good for detoxifying estrogen in the liver, once again, as well as any other ultra low carb vegetable like cucumber or let's see what else. All these cruciferous ones are coming to mind. Eggplant, kinda, not quite. Oh my God, I've got an entire list, which I can give to you. But alfalfa sprouts, like beans. There's so many different ones out there, but they're very low carb, they're very high in fiber, and they're very nutrient dense. And then the other one that I actually put as a green light carb is eggs, because although eggs are a source of protein, they also actually have carbohydrates in them. Then we have orange light carbs. So again, orange light carbs, they're still nutrient dense carbohydrates, but they're lower carb as opposed to like ultra low carb. And so it doesn't mean that they don't have their place in a ketogenic diet, but what I just say is like, enjoy orange light carbs, but have them with green light carbs as opposed to instead of them, okay? Just because they're slightly higher, and if all you did was eat orange light carbs, you might actually have too many carbs to get kicked out of ketosis, so it's just kind of like just as a safety system, okay? So inside orange light carbohydrates, I've got like lower carb vegetables, like eggplant perhaps, or what would be another one? Trying to think. I've got an entire list. I don't know why they're all not coming to me right now. Fruit, right? Low carb fruit, nuts and seeds. Dairy falls into this category because some dairy can have slightly more carbohydrates. And just like generally speaking, like low carb cooking ingredients. And then there are red light carbs. And the red light carbs, for me, they're carbohydrates they don't have very many carbs, but they're also not very nutrient dense. And so they're more like a treat to me. When I'm thinking clean and green keto, these are they're special treats, but they should not be sort of what you base your meals around or how you create your ketogenic diet. So sugar alcohols, right? So like the erythritols and the monk fruits and all these other things, which can be a great addition to a ketogenic diet, but they shouldn't be the basis of a ketogenic diet. Alcohol, even like the low carb alcohol, obviously. Keto treats and processed foods. Again, they're great as an emergency snack, but far too often I see that women just start relying on like pepperoni sticks and like keto protein bars and stuff like that because it fits their macros, but they're not getting any nutrient density from these foods. So yes, they can be used in emergencies. Yes, they can be enjoyed on special occasions, but I would not make that the main source of your carbohydrates. Okay, so that's carbs. And like I said, I have got like this entire list. I'm happy to share it with you. It'll just show you what foods to eat. Next up is protein. So when it comes to protein, it's a very simple rule once again. So the carb rule is just eat as many vegetables as you can, make sure they're low carb. Get my list. The protein rule is pretty easy as well. Make sure that in order to get enough carbs, you're choosing, what you're doing is essentially choosing protein dense foods. Because again, most women, they're not getting enough protein. And this is another myth, I believe, in the ketogenic world, where people are told that if they eat too much protein, they're going to get kicked out of ketosis. I've never seen it happen, but anyways. But generally speaking, when it comes to protein and ketogenic diets, your best bet is animal protein. And if you are vegan or vegetarian, it makes it a little bit harder. It's not impossible, but it makes it a little bit harder. Because unfortunately, most of the sources of protein that are vegan or vegetarian also happen to be higher in carbohydrates. So beans and legumes, they're a great source of vegetarian protein, but they're higher in carbs. So it just makes it a little bit more challenging, not impossible, but a little bit more challenging. So when it comes to making sure you're getting enough protein, you want to make sure that once again you're focusing on protein dense food. So most of your protein, your green protein, is coming from animal protein. So like chicken or fish or shrimp or red meat, as long as it's organic and grass-fed. You can get some of your protein from nuts, from seeds, from dairy, from eggs, from vegetables. They all contain protein, but they also contain carbs. So you got to be a little bit careful there. That's why those would be orange protein, in the sense that they can be enjoyed with the main protein, the animal protein, but not instead of, because they will contain carbohydrates. And then finally, the red ones, or the red protein, would be like your beans and legumes, which I think have their place, but just not in the first sort of 3 to 4 weeks of keto, when I'm like, you've got to commit. Once you're fat adapted, which basically just means that your body now fully understands how to use fat for fuel, bring them back in. I think they're an excellent food. They are always, in any book I read about menopause, are always like, eat more beans, eat more legumes, eat more lentils. And so I do think that they're a great food source, and I think it's good to bring them back in, just not in that initial period where you're teaching your body how to use fat. Okay? All right. Finally, when it comes to fat. So when it comes to fat, this is the tough one, because again, so many women, the mistake that they make is that they think they're doing keto, and so they go on a low carb diet, but they forget that it's low carb, high fat. Okay? So keto is low carb, high fat. Low carb, high fat. And so accidentally what happens so many times is that women do low carb, low fat. And while they may be getting into ketosis, I don't even know. I don't know if you have to have fat, but I can tell you that what is going to happen is that for a lot of these women is that they're going to hit a plateau, because their body won't adapt to using fat, because again, we've got to encourage the body to use the fat. And I think this is why so many of these women hit a weight loss plateau, because they see that metabolic compensation I talk about all the time. And so my belief is that at the very beginning, at least for the first 4 weeks, and again, until you are fat adapted, you have to make sure that it is low carb, high fat, right? So that your body can start taking that dietary fat and turning it into energy. And then once your body is really good at taking fat and turning it into energy, then you can use fat as a lever, and you can eliminate some of the fat and actually use your stored body fat as sort of like a fourth macronutrient. But you've got to first, at the beginning, make sure you're eating enough fat. And when it comes to fat, I have kind of like one main rule, which is that you want to eat healthy fats. You don't want to be having the unhealthy fats. It's another big mistake. Like if you're guzzling back like vegetable oils and mayo and stuff like that, then you're probably causing inflammation in your body. And so we want to make sure we're eating healthy fats, which basically mean that they are minimally processed and they are anti-inflammatory. And I'll keep it simple. I've got 5 of them for you. Avocado oil, coconut oil, grass-fed butter and or ghee, olive oil, MCT oil, and avocado oil mayo. Those are the only 6 fats I use. There are more fats that you can play around with, but if you have those 6, you are good to go. And just making sure that you are eating fat to satiety. General rule of thumb, 2 to 3 tablespoons of fat per meal is what you're probably going to be wanting to eat. That's kind of just as a starting point. Now, of course, everyone's individual. With my clients, once again, I don't give them macros. I don't tell them how many calories to eat. I give them like general guidelines, and I tell them to trust their instinct and eat to satiety. And if they're still hungry, have a snack. But that's just a general rule of thumb. Okay, so let me see if there was anything else I wanted to add to that. Oh yeah, just the bad fats. So bad fats to avoid, because this is really, really important. Vegetable oils, seed oils, trans fats, right? So anything that says hydrogenated, so including margarine, your just like regular mayo, like Hellmann's mayo is made with soybean oil, so you want to avoid that. Any kind of salad dressing that's made with soybean oil or any kind of vegetable oil. Most restaurant food, because they are not using healthy fats, they're using unhealthy fats, which again, it's fine if it's an occasional treat. I'm all for going out to the restaurant, but if you eat at a restaurant like 5, 6, 7 times a week, then you have to reconsider how, like, the fats that you're getting in your diet. And then processed meats, okay? And then to that, I would add any fat from conventionally raised animals. So that would be like your meats and your dairy. And this is why this is important for women our age especially, is because the conventionally raised animals are given antibiotics and they're giving hormones to keep them disease-free and to make them grow faster. And one of those hormones is estrogen. And what happens is that these animals take these antibiotics and these hormones, and then we eat them, and they go into our body, and they burden our liver, and they create estrogen dominance, and they make us feel like crap, and they make us gain weight. So that's why for women our age, that's one of the things I customize, is like, just stay away or get grass-fed organic. Okay, so the final thing I wanted to talk about is just a couple of different tips for success. And so the way that I see it, there are kind of like 4 different phases of fat burning. I'm just pulling them up here. So the 4 different phases. Phase number 1 is getting into ketosis. Phase number 2 is becoming fat adapted, which is kind of what I talked about today, that first sort of 4 to 6 weeks where your body is making that metabolic switch and really just figuring out how to use fat as a main source of energy. The third phase that I like to call it is the phase where you can start to create a negative fat flux. This is where we can start to use our dietary body fat as a macronutrient. And a negative fat flux just means that this is where, in my opinion, this is when you can start to create a caloric deficit and not see that metabolic compensation, because by now your body knows how to access or take fat and turn it into energy. So it is much more likely to take the fat from your fat cells and turn it into energy instead of slowing your metabolism down and causing a weight loss plateau. So that's phase 3. And then the final phase is what I call harnessing metabolic flexibility. And this is where we are now like, hallelujah, my body knows how to burn fat. But you know what? Carbs aren't like this evil food, so let's bring it back in moderation, in a strategic way, and make this a sustainable lifestyle. So the final thing I want to do is just give you a couple of different tips and tricks. Most of them I've given you the ones for getting into ketosis. So again, ease it. Tip number 1, and this is on a PDF as well if you want it. Ease into ketosis to minimize keto flu, like I said at the beginning. If you're hungry, eat. This is not the time to use willpower. This is not the time for caloric deficits. Recognize the importance of drinking a lot of water to stay hydrated, and reduce your stress. That's a 4th one, because like I said, stress can be this big reason that women cannot get into ketosis, or they get stuck in keto flu. So this might be, when you're getting into ketosis, it's not great to do this when you've got like deadlines, or you're moving, or you're trying to prepare for maybe you're like, doing like 5 days of CrossFit or whatever it may be. This is not the time. Like, you've got to like relax a little bit. So take some stuff off your to-do list, maybe take an entire week off of your workouts, and just take as much stress off your body as you can so that your body can just ease into it. When you move into phase 2, which is where you're becoming fat adapted and your body is learning how to use fat for fuel, prioritize ultra low carb vegetables, right? Like I said, the ultra low carb vegetables, if you just make that your priority, you will not have to count calories, you will not have to count macros, your body will know what to do, you just need to trust it. Get help learning the basics. It's such a big transition, it's such a big flip, that if you can get some help from someone in order to do this, I would highly recommend it. Eat more fat. Even when you think you're eating enough fat, you're probably not eating enough fat. So do not be shy of the fat. You will probably be surprised that the more fat you eat, the more weight loss you will see. Okay, so eat more fat. Don't be shy of the fat. And when you are ready, reduce your snacking. So you do not need to be, when you are ready, as you get fat adapted, as your body starts to use fat for fuel, what you're going to notice, like I said, is less appetite, less cravings, less hunger. And partially, it's because your body is now very able to go into lipolysis, which is when the body takes body fat and turns it into energy. So you won't need to eat in between meals. So when that feels comfortable, stop snacking. When it comes to phase 3, creating a negative fat flux, which is where you're essentially creating a caloric deficit so that your body is partially relying on stored body fat, incorporating intermittent fasting is an excellent tool. Fasting in between meals, so again, not snacking and lengthening that time in between like breakfast and lunch and dinner. Make body fat its own macro or macronutrient. So this is where you can start to put less fat in your meals. So it's okay, then it's okay to start doing maybe 30 grams of fat per meal instead of 45, knowing that the rest of that fat's going to come from body fat when your body needs it. And then another thing that you can do is, which is similar to intermittent fasting, because intermittent fasting, there's so many different ways of doing it. And a lot of people like to do fat fasting and within the keto community with like bulletproof coffees, but a water fast only. For 12 hours, at least at a minimum every day, I would do 12 hours of water fasting. So that might mean that you stop eating at 7 and you do not have anything but water or black coffee and tea until 7 the next day. Again, that just means that for 12 hours, once your body has used up whatever you had for dinner, you are setting yourself up for lipolysis or fat burning, and your body now knows how to do it. And so it should really maximize your results. And then the final phase, which is, what I call harnessing metabolic flexibility or bringing carbs back into your life, because we don't want to be doing this long term. It's very hard to maintain long term. So tip number one is you've got to find your own unique carbohydrate tolerance, because everyone's going to be different. A 40-year-old woman will be very different from a 56-year-old woman. A woman who has a sedentary office job will be very different from a woman who runs like long distance as a pastime, right? We're all very different, so you've got to learn your own unique tolerance. Experiment with carb cycling, which is when you cycle carbs in and out of your diet, and there's multiple ways to do that. I did a whole session on that you can look up. You can experiment with longer fasts, right? So maybe you could do OMAD, which is 1 meal a day. You could do that. Again, we're harnessing metabolic flexibility, the ability to burn either sugar or fat for fuel. Once you've been doing this for a while and your body knows how to do it, you could slip in some longer fasts, like a 1 meal a day or even like an entire day of fasting, knowing that your body is going to be fine. It knows what to do. It can just use all of the fat in your body as fuel. And then the final key to harnessing your metabolic flexibility is really figuring out a maintenance plan, because what is the point of all this, of going on a diet, if you're just going to go back to doing what you were before? And so again, you've got to figure out where you can live, what feels like a permanent lifestyle, something that is flexible enough that you can enjoy your favorite foods, but not so strict that you can't maintain it. So those are my 16 tips and how to get started. If you want some of the cheat sheets to go with this, again, you know what to do. I see some of you already commented, but in the comments, just put cheat sheets and I can send these to you. If you have any questions, I'll open it up for you right now and you can ask away. And while I do that, so I do have a course. It's called Keto Essentials for Busy Women. I know some of the women listening right now have participated in that course. I haven't actually released it in a very long time. And I'm thinking of maybe doing it again if there's enough interest. I'd like to do it, instead of just selling it whenever, I like to do it as a sort of like do it with a group of women so that I can give them support. So if there's enough interest, then I'd probably do it if we could get like 10 to 20 women who are interested. Then we can pull that one back out and maybe do it together in the month of June, even though that's coming up really quickly here. But in the meantime, do you have any questions, ladies? I'm just keeping an eye out here. Any questions about anything? And then I'm going to be stopping talking because my froggy voice is getting worse. Okay, it looks like we are good. So hopefully that was helpful for just understanding what clean and green keto kind of looks like for me. Again, if you are interested in learning more about this or in getting more support, I do have a course that goes way more in depth into this, broken down into different modules. What do you think about bulletproof coffee, says Ashley. Well, I think that, okay, here are my 2 thoughts on it. So a lot of women have bulletproof coffee instead of breakfast. And I feel like it's not very nutrient dense, and that a good breakfast, like a good solid breakfast, the way that I like making my breakfast, which is either going to be like a very nutrient low carb smoothie or like eggs and veggies, in my opinion, it's just going to do way more for your body than a bulletproof coffee. It can be used as a tool for women who are struggling with weight loss, in the sense of, you know, if your problem is insulin resistance and you're just really struggling to get those insulin levels down, I think that having mainly just fat in the morning in the form of a bulletproof coffee, where if you don't know what that is, you're basically blending MCT oil and butter with coffee, then the benefit of that could be that it keeps your insulin levels low, and that potentially that just gives your body more leeway to burn fat. But again, most of the meals that I eat are pretty low carb anyways and don't have a big impact on my insulin. So I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of them. They're not my favorite. I drank them when I first started keto, and now I'm just like, meh, I'll just eat at breakfast. Or I'll skip breakfast altogether and fast. Any other questions for me? Let's see here. And just make sure I didn't miss any. I think I have them all. All right. Well, there we have it, ladies. I think this is the end. If anything else comes up, you know where to reach me. And until then, have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys again soon. Bye.